This video on the outbreak of the irrational and the video about organ sales will save lives serve to give examples for what you should consider as you analyze a writer's rhetorical choices. So let's take a look at some examples of rhetoric in Sarah Dzubay's An Outbreak of the Irrational, an argument in favor of vaccination that seeks to understand the position of anti-vaxxers and convince them to reconsider their objections. So on page 808, we see Dzubay begin her argument with a strong pathos appeal to her readers. She says, in the spring of 2015, a number of families who had visited Disneyland in the hopes of enjoying the happiest place on earth returned home only to discover that their children had contracted measles. Now, whether you have children or younger siblings or not, most people don't want to see kids get hurt, right? So already Dzubay has made a point of connection. We share the same values and an appeal to emotion. Dzubay paints a picture here, a family vacation that is supposed to be safe and fun at the happiest place on earth, disrupted by an unexpected disease. Dzubay doesn't linger on the image, but shifts quickly to explain that measles is something we thought we'd eradicated, indicating that this should have been avoidable. She engages us then with a question, asking us to consider why have diseases like measles and polio re-emerged in some of the most developed, wealthy, and educated countries in the world. Questions like these draw the reader in, and here we see an appeal to the reader's identification with and perhaps pride in their nation. All of these are great examples of pathos, an appeal to the reader's emotions and values in order to get them to pay attention to Dzubay's argument and care about what she wants to persuade them of. So what is Dzubay arguing? We see it in the title and throughout the rest of the essay. There has been a rise in anti-vaccine rhetoric, and she believes that by and large, those ideas are irrational. She argues for the importance of vaccination and against the major counter-arguments. So looking at the top of page 809, we see Dzubay once again trying to connect with her audience. Here we see her addressing the real fears readers might have about vaccinations that she wants to overcome in order to argue her position. Recognizing a counter-argument like this with respect and even empathy can be a powerful move in eventually persuading your audience. She doesn't dismiss the real fears that people have. She recognizes them up front when she says the fear of vaccines is not unwarranted. The idea of injecting your child with some foreign substance whose purpose, side effects, and origins you may not be educated about is a frightening concept. Of course, she doesn't stop there. She goes on to say, but as with many aspects of medicine, the costs must be weighed against the benefits. This seems like a logical approach, and thus this is logos. Logos doesn't always have to be a number, a piece of data, or a citation of a source. It can also mean simply logical reasoning that, if explained sensibly, we accept as true. Now, some people are so good with words that they can make bad logic sound reasonable, however, so we always want to be on the lookout for that. This statement, however, is one that many of us take into account every day. I take medications that have possible side effects, some of which are rare, and some of which I actually experience. But the benefits of my medication for my health outweighs those negative aspects for me. Now, there is a difference between minor side effects and extremely dangerous ones, so that logic may not apply for every example for every person. But we're not talking about individuals. We're talking right now about an idea that Dzubay thinks we should all take into account for the good of our society. She then continues to support her position with logical claims. She says the fact of the matter is that without vaccines, our globe would be ravaged by disease, and we would not be able to be as productive and successful as we are today. Now, of course, when Dzubay says the fact is, Is that convincing people who are skeptical, who think vaccines aren't needed because they haven't seen these diseases harm someone they know? Dzubay is going to need to bring in some credible sources if she's going to reach all of her readers. Remember, she's arguing a position, which means she must anticipate people who disagree with her. So whether you agree with her or not, you need to judge if she's doing a good job to persuade skeptics. Now, of course, this topic is incredibly relevant right now. I didn't plan it that way. We are seeing how a virus without a vaccine, without treatment, is ravaging the world right now and disrupting our daily lives, like Dzubay says, our productivity and our health. In time, when we have found a vaccine, this moment we're in will be an example of the importance of vaccines, medical research, and equitable access to health care. So we're in an interesting moment that an update to Dzubay's article could in fact take into account. But back to the argument we're working with right now. The rest of that second paragraph doesn't have any citations, which may or may not be a problem. What do you think? We do see in the next paragraph on page 809 quite a few logos moves on Dzubay's part that I think are important. So she defines an important term, herd immunity. She says herd immunity refers to the idea that by vaccinating a majority, the small population who cannot get vaccinated will still be protected from the disease. And so that includes infants, the elderly, and people who are otherwise immunocompromised. Again, a conversation we're having amidst the coronavirus right now as we seek to, not yet with vaccines, but with social distancing to protect others. Now, Dzubay goes on to cite a number of reputable sources to explain the importance of vaccinations in protecting our communities and those most vulnerable among us. If you take a look at the end at her Works Cited page, you can see that her sources include the scientific journals Nature Immunology and BMC Public Health. Throughout her article, she also cites sources from the World Health Organization, the CDC, the LA Times, and a book by David E. Sadava, a medical researcher and professor of biology. The book she cites of his, The Science of Biology, is in fact now in its 10th edition, and a little bit of research told me it's constantly updated and continually used as one of the foremost educational texts in schools across the country. So her sources have credibility, and this can help establish credibility for her as a writer. After all, Sarah Dzubay is a student author, and therefore not yet an expert, despite the fact that she's pursuing her major in biological sciences. But as a student, she knows she needs to research well, find sources that she can trust, and that establishes her as a credible researcher and writer. So if this whole essay was an opinion piece with no sources, it would not be as strong. Thus its logos would be poor too. So you can see a connection between a writer supporting their points with logical reasoning and good sources. So this establishes both logos and ethos as a result. Thus, Dzubay feels confident in making a forthright statement like she does on page 810, a little bit further down, indicating the people she is seeking to convince to change. She says, families choosing to opt out of the MMR and other vaccines are a threat to the protection that we have built against disease as a national and international community. Electing to refuse the vaccines that the majority of the population are provided with based solely on unfounded personal interest is selfish, because these individuals become free riders in a vaccinated community whose herd immunity they are counting on to protect them. Now, those are strong words. In fact, they are emotionally loaded words. Threat, selfish. These words are powerful, and deliberately so. Now consider, will these make readers go on the defensive? Or is it exactly what they need to hear to wake up to Dzubay's argument? That's the kind of thing you decide when you write a rhetorical analysis. Do you think that was a powerful choice? Do you think it wasn't a good idea? Up to you. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about with this essay, but I want to keep these lectures from getting too long, and there's also the possibility that you might analyze Dzubay's article for your rhetorical analysis essay. So I don't want to go over it in too much detail. I need to leave some things for you guys to analyze. But let's take a look at one more aspect of this article. An interesting move that Dzubay makes throughout her essay is an effort to consistently address counter-arguments and skeptical readers. On page 810, she gives an example of the kind of people who have argued against vaccination, and in the next paragraph on 811, she explains why some of them are against vaccination. She isn't dismissing them outright. She takes the time to recognize her opposition's stance and then seeks to counter it with her own argument. At the bottom of page 811, she once again begins her paragraph with a recognition of the other side, noting that political and ethical values play a role in beliefs and choices about vaccination. We see her argue back, however, on page 812, beginning with the firm statement, besides being scientifically incorrect. How well do you think she argues against these other views after that statement? Is she persuasive? These again are things you might consider in a rhetorical analysis. The goal of writing a rhetorical analysis is to identify the moves that a writer makes. Do they appeal to emotions and values in readers successfully? Do they get you to care about an issue? Do they make sound, reasonable arguments that you can understand and are supported by evidence and reputable sources? Do they address counter-arguments fairly and persuasively? Can you follow the flow of their argument without confusion? Do there seem to be any leaps in logic or important information or viewpoints that are left out? Remember, in a rhetorical analysis, your goal is not to argue for or against the issue that the writer is discussing. Your goal is to analyze how well you think the author writes their argument. For example, you can agree with Dzubay and support vaccination, but still argue that she could have written a more effective essay. That is the focus of a rhetorical analysis, whether you're looking at logos, pathos, and ethos, or other elements of writing that you think can make or break an essay.